In this 8 to 10 minute documentary, we will go over some of Saul's losses and experiences in his life. This documentary takes place in 1831 at St. Jerome Residential School, and where Saul experienced a loss. Saul was a natural gifted hockey player. He was first introduced to hockey at St. Jerome's Residential School. Father Gaston was the priest that started hockey at this residential school, and this is where Saul learned how to play hockey. Saul is from an Ojibwe Indigenous community in North Ontario, and he is a descendant from the Fish Clan. The movie was directed by Stephen Campanelli, and the movie is based on the book Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. In the woods, Saul and his family settle along a lake. Saul's brother had just run from a residential school and had picked up a bad sickness. As the days went on, Saul's brother got worse and worse and eventually passed away. This was Saul's first loss. He and his brother were always very close, and they loved each other very much. Saul's parents wanted to bury him the European way, but his grandma asked to do it the indigenous way. But in the end, the parents took Saul's brother to town and buried him. Saul and his grandmother stayed behind. They started to wonder if Saul's parents would ever come back. Then it became fall. Saul and his grandma were the only ones out in the bush. Then it became winter. Saul lost his father and mother. As the days got colder, Saul's grandma and Saul ran out of food. His grandma decided they needed to go back in town to get food. As he and his grandma got ready for the trip, the water was about to freeze. So Saul and his grandma started paddling down the river. But with the excitement of making it to the town, they capsized the boat, and they were stranded on the side of the river, freezing. As they walked along a railroad track, Saul's grandma wrapped Saul in her coat to keep Saul warm. They lay on the track, and Saul's grandma slowly passed away. Here's another loss that Saul experienced in his life. When Saul was found and sent to residential school, Saul lost many things. He lost his freedom to speak, his native language, his loss of culture, and loss of identity. His hope dried up. Saul was put into a residential school that was run by the Catholic Church. Residential schools started up in the 17th century, and about 150,000 Indigenous children attended these schools. Over 6,000 children have died in these residential schools, either from sickness or from suicide. In the book and the movie, Saul had to witness Indigenous children commit suicide, and most were at a young age, which is a very hard thing to see. The main purpose of the residential schools was to assimilate Indigenous people into society, which of course did not work and was extremely not okay. As we saw in Saul's life, he lost most of his loved ones to non-Indigenous people, and that Saul's life has been ruined by residential schools. He suffered from alcoholism and a lot of racism from people around him. Saul experienced a lot of untrue stereotypes in his life. One that struck out was the drunken Indian. The drunken Indian was widely used to look down on Indigenous people. As Saul was suffering from alcoholism, many people called him a drunken Indian, but Saul never got the treatment that he deserved a long time ago. This problem made Saul's life very difficult. Many Indigenous people that survived the residential schools have suffered from trauma, schools which led to many untrue stereotypes. The drunken Indian was long used. It first started when the European first met the Indigenous people, and the drunken Indian is still used to this day. People today still believe that Indigenous people are always drinking and are drunk most of the time, but this untrue stereotype or statement needs to change. By spreading awareness to people in Canada, we'll get a deeper understanding of the people that lived on the lands for thousands of years. And telling people that Indigenous are just like you and me, and helping Indigenous people that are suffering from addiction will lead to people to stop believing in all the stereotypes that have been thought of for many years. In conclusion, Saul felt a lot of loss due to residential schools. He lost his identity and most of his family, which led him to have an addiction for alcohol. This took him a very, very long time to heal from all the trauma that residential schools have caused.